Hello, my name is Stu Jaffee, and it's now May, the year 2007, and in 1 month I'm going to be 78 years of age. I'm here in the bright Florida sun, and Tom Jaffee is filming me, and the bright sun makes me squint. I'd like to tell you, or he asked me if I would, tell you a little bit about my life story, and I'll be delighted. Let's start with my father's side of the family, then my mother's side. Then we'll go into my boyhood. My father came to this country from Russia in the year 1907. His name was Samuel Jaffee. In Russia, it was called Lyova. He was given the name Jaffee when he arrived in Galveston, Texas. The rest of the family and his original name was Yanovsky, but Jaffee was given to him. Why Galveston, Texas? Because a great many Jews had come in to the New York port from Russia, and the wealthy German banking family, particularly Jacob Schiff was the leader, were afraid that they would supersaturate the labor market, and so he had Jews that had paid for the ships to be transferred through the Gulf of Mexico to land in Galveston, Texas, because they needed help there, and for that reason. The reason Jews were leaving Russia was they had what was called the Pale of Settlement. P-A-L-E means fence or boundary. The Pale of Settlement was imposed by Tsar Nicholas, and Jews had to stay and live within a particular area. My father's father had a dry goods store, that sheets and towels and that sort of thing, and they combined the dry goods store from his little town of it was called Jabotin near Kiev, and so a number of the people would get together, pool their money, and one of them would cross that boundary, the Pale of Settlement, and go to Russia to pick up their merchandise. They always had some extra money because they had to bribe their way along. Every now and again, the Russian police would hold a Jew for ransom to get even more money, and someone would have to go up with the ransom money. And this particular occasion, it was my grandfather who went to Moscow with the money, bailed out his colleague, came back, and in the process developed pneumonia, which was then called the old man's friend because he died, and he was probably in his 40s at that time. The old man's friend. His name was Yisroel, and so named after him, when I was born, my Hebrew name given to me was Yisroel, which means Israel. Much closer to the fact is my cousin Royal Flag Jonas, whose first name Royal is directly derived from Yisroel. But anyway, my father landed in Galveston, Texas, and then through the few years went on to St. Joseph, Missouri, and then Davenport, Iowa, up the Mississippi, and this was sort of a regular route for Jewish people at that time who wanted to go to the East Coast. And then from Davenport, Iowa, and each of these places he worked at something or other. By the way, he died when I was 12 years old, so I never really got the story firsthand at all. And then he wound up in New York and owned what was called a luncheonette in what was called the Silk Stocking District. He had working for him a man named Jim Fullenbaum, who changed his name to Fuller, very good businessman. He worked there behind the counter, but then developed business techniques and wound up buying all of the cafeterias in a buying syndicate of department stores that was called the Boston Store. And this was the Boston Store Buying Syndicate. Had an office in New York, but it was Lucky Platt in Poughkeepsie, the Brown Company in Providence, Sage Allen in Hartford, Gilchrist in Boston, and Denham and McKay in Worcester, Massachusetts. The Depression came. Jim Fuller lost almost everything because he was way out there on margin, but he was able to keep Hartford and Worcester, and he asked my father if he would go to Worcester and run Worcester, which he did in 1929 and eventually purchased. That's how the family got to Worcester. Just to fill out my father's family, he had several brothers and sisters. He was able to bring over from Russia his mother and his sister Sonia, and his brother Fred and his brother Ben. And then the McCarran Act closed the door to immigration of certain peoples from Eastern Europe, which meant the Jews. And so his brother Kuchi and sister Manya went to Mexico City, where they were welcomed. And it's now the year 2007. I have 5 generations of family, all named Yanofsky, in Mexico City. At any rate, while in New York, in the Silk Stocking District, in his luncheonette, he met a very lovely lady, very talented. Her name was Birdie. Birdie because her Yiddish name must have been Vogel, which means bird. So her English name was Birdie, and her maiden name was Straussman. And she was a secretary in a major insurance office on Maiden Lane, down to the Battery in New York. And she worked for Mr. Wiley, and he was a very big-time socialite insurance person whose daughters went to the Bennett School for Girls in New York State, that sort of thing. At any rate, she met my father, and in 1929 they were married in New York. No, it was before then, 1927, because I was born in 1929. I'm the firstborn. So the Depression had hit, as I told you. My father was in Worcester. My mother stayed in Brooklyn to have her baby, me, in the Williamsburg Maternity Hospital on June 24th, 1929. And 7 weeks thereafter, she took the train and went to New York to join her husband. And my home has been in Worcester since the age of 7 weeks. But people think I'm still from Brooklyn. That's okay. I love the idea, and I love the Dodgers. Now, my father ran this restaurant, and we lived on the east side of Worcester, where a great many of the Jewish people lived. And we moved from one place to another, each one, I guess, a little bit of an improvement, from Loxwood Street to 16 Wabash Avenue to 7 Wabash Avenue. And when I was about 7 years old, we moved away from the east side to what was called the west side. And that was Intervale Road near Richmond Avenue in Worcester, Massachusetts. And so although I started school in the Granite Street School, and by the 3rd grade I was at Midland Street School. My principal in the Granite Street School was Miss McGillicuddy. And Miss McGillicuddy was from the Brookfields, as was her famous brother, Cornelius McGillicuddy, who was known then as Connie Mack, who was the great manager of the Philadelphia baseball team. My kindergarten teacher was Miss Reed, and she sent home a note to my mother. She said, "Stewart asks too many questions." So I guess I was an inquisitive little boy, as are my grandchildren, I'm happy to say, and my 4 sons. Anyway, we moved to the west side, and I grew up on Intervale Road. Now, I was a very good student. I was a terrible athlete. As a matter of fact, I can't remember being in any sports. The only things I remember are this. When I was about 8 years old, my parents decided that I should go to a summer camp. And so I was sent to the Arbeiterring camp. Arbeiterring means workman's circle. It was a Jewish sort of socialist organization, although they had no political ideas. They heard about the camp. And I did not like it at all. I didn't like it at all. That I remember. I came home. Then another time, when I was about 10 years old, I went to Camp Emo, E-M-O-H. Why Camp Emo? Because my mother's friend, Mrs. Elkine, was sending her son, Brucey Elkine, to Camp Emo. So that's reason enough. Emo is backwards for H-O-M-E, home. This was the summer camp of a home for orphans in Boston. And so there were Brucey Elkind and Joe Cotton from Worcester and Stu Jaffee with all these unfortunate kids. I'll tell you that Parents' Day was not, at Camp Emo was nothing very impressive, quite sad. And at Camp Emo, when I got off the bus, and I was really nauseated from that long trip to Maine, I followed Joe Cotton to his bunk and got into a bunk. And Joe Cotton was 3 years older than little Stu Jaffee. So here I am, a 9-year-old, in a bunk with 12-year-olds. So I remember that I knew nothing about playing baseball or anything. They put me up, put a bat in my hands, and for some crazy reason, I hit the ball. And they said, run, 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 run. So I ran to first base. And then the person who followed me, the pitcher must have been, major league quality, pitched and bam, there was another long ball, blah, blah, by that boy. And he ran to first base and ran to second and ran to third. But I held my ground on first base because I didn't know you were supposed to run. And they gave me holy hell for that. On the first rainy day, the chief resident, the chief counselor, Shadow Malsbury, came around, and there was a little quiz. That's what the rainy day activity was. So he asked me these questions, and then he said, Stewie, how old are you? What grade are you in? What are you doing here with these 12-year-olds? And I told him I just followed Joe Cotton. So then they put me in my correct age group. And that's my experience at camp, and that's my whole athletic activity as a kid. What else did I do? I have a nice picture. Oh, so when I was 2 years old, my sister Gloria was born. And she was given the Hebrew name Chava, which means Eve. Nice enough. And when I was 4 years old, my brother Bobby was born. I don't know his Hebrew name, but at any rate, I do remember this. They brought him home. He was lying on the bed, and this little 4-year-old, Stewie, me, walked over to look at him, and I received a direct scream right in my face from little Bobby. So anyway, that may well be why I became a urologist, incidentally. I realized this was not toxic material. Anyway, so with my brother and sister, we had a lovely childhood. We never really got presents as kids because my parents were just not involved with presents. We got whatever we wanted. Whatever we wanted. I wanted an electric train, fine. I wanted to get a BB gun, so I got a Red Ryder BB gun. And my brother Bob and I used to shoot one another. We had a garage roof that you could climb on, and we had a little tin helmet. Forget about eyes, who thought of that? But we get up, put the tin helmet, sometimes just wave the tin helmet, and boom, there would be a misfire. It was right near the back wall of the garage for the Lenox Market, a grocery store. And one day, the police came, and I was pulled out of class and taken down to the principal's office, and there was a policeman there, and they accused me of shooting through the window. One of the drivers was having his lunch in the garage, and the window came down on him. He said, these kids, the BB gun is the big one over there. So he says, why did you shoot it? I swore up and down. I cried, I suppose, whatever. They believed me. And I had no idea. Years later, my brother Bob told me he shot out the window. So anyway, I'm still holding that over his head as blackmail. I remember sitting on December 7th, 1941, in the living room with my father, and we were listening to our Magnavox radio. See, our restaurant was in a department store, Denham and McKay, which have wonderful furniture departments, radio and all. So we had the latest. This is a beautiful Magnavox that had a Victrola, it was called, a phonograph in it. You could get FM, and you could get short wave. And I used to listen. I loved classical music as a kid. Played the piano poorly, but loved listening to classical music. And the only place you could get it, and I would get it frequently, was from Leopoldville, Belgian, Congo. They had a classical music station, and I would listen to that. And that was unusual. A lot of people listened to shortwave radio. It's pre-television. Radio was wonderful. You know why? Because you'd listen to a program and visualize it and make your own beautiful sets and beautiful people and all. When you actually saw them, in the early days of TV anyways, as actors and all, you were disappointed because my own productions were sometimes much more colorful. Anyway, so I was listening with my father, and they said that the Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor. And I was, how old was I? 11 years old. I said, Daddy, what does that mean? He said, it means we're at war. And that war took its major toll. He still had a brother living in Kiev, and his brother was married and had children, and I think that's what it was which caused the terrible depression that my father developed. And in 1942 he took his own life, which I discovered when I was 12 years old, coming back from a Boy Scout hike. At any rate, that saddened us, but it put my mother to work because we had a cafeteria with a lot of help, a lot of people working for us, a lot of people to feed, and so she, not really knowing the business, went to work like about 2 days after his demise, and so did I. I was 12 years old when I started working. The working age, by the way, we didn't know it, was 14. But I was there working in all capacities. And all capacities means I was a soda jerk. I made wonderful sodas. I could get a phone call at 3 in the morning. The baker is there, but the baker's assistant didn't show up. So I was a little older than... No, at first my mother would drive me down. And I would go to help the baker like 4 o'clock in the morning, because that's when you do the baking for your breakfast train. At any rate, we loved what was called the store. And we all came home every night and talked about the store. Talked about the store. You know, what did you do today and what was interesting? And it was really something family. And my sister then worked there too. My brother Bob started working there, and the minute he started working there, his hands broke down. Something about the handling of food which caused an allergy, and he developed cracked fingers, of course, precluded his working with food. And we'll get more into that and his hands at a little bit later date, because it's an interesting story there. We have a photograph that I still have on my desk, and it shows me holding a microphone. It's a make-believe microphone, and I'm standing on a wooden box, and we have a poster hanging behind us as a flat, and my sister and several others are sitting on a bench. My brother's there too, and I'm announcing the acts. We are doing a stage show in the neighborhood for the kids to raise money for the American Red Cross. And it was a notable event. The newspaper photographers took that picture and it was printed. My brother Bob had it and sent me a copy, and it's a treasure. Anyway, my boyhood was very nice. Now, I did well in school. I got good marks, and at that time, if you were interested in going to college, and I thought I wanted to go to college because I thought I wanted to be an engineer. You know, you had to go to college for that. If you got good marks, A's and B's, in your first 6 years, you did not have to go to grades 7 and 8 in the same Midland Street public schools. They had 3 special schools in Worcester called preps, and whereas the regular schools, and went home for lunch and then had an afternoon session ending at 3:30. We in the preps, and I went to Seaver Street Prep, started school at 7 in the morning and were finished at 1, so I could go to work in the restaurant for the afternoon business. And the marvel about the prep system was we learned French and we learned Latin, as well as all the other subjects. And I loved Latin because it taught me how to speak English. Latin taught me the roots of so many of our English words. I'm still, at age 77, almost 78, thrilled when I look at something and recognize its Latin origin. It also taught me French. It wasn't immersion, but we studied French. And indeed, when we went to France with 3 couples, it was the Doris's 25th anniversary, and it was ours too, so that's how old I was. 25th anniversary. I got married when I was 27, 52. I could understand everything that people were saying, and I could converse with them, and I became the translator for our group from those 2 years at Seaver Street Prep. Well, I then went on to high school. And in high school, classical high school, which was set up for people who want to go to college. If you didn't want to go to college, we had very excellent trade schools. We could learn the trade of becoming a first-class electrician or plumber. We had commercial schools where women would learn to be excellent bookkeepers and accountants and paralegals. Anyway, I went to the pre-college, classical high school, which is very good. Continued my Latin, among other things. Now, I joined a fraternity, and this is a very enjoyable part of my life. It was called AMB, Alpha Mu Beta, because all fraternities had Greek letter names. And Alpha Mu Beta, and my shirt in Greek letters said Alpha Mu Beta, was for all my brothers, Alpha Mu Beta. There were 2 Jewish fraternities, AMB and Mu Sig. And we always thought that the Mu Sigs were the snootier guys, because they were. And we were the guys who came from the east side, although we lived on the west side. But that's how it was. You know, life has many stratifications, regardless of what you are. I mean, even if everybody puts on the same Boston Celtics uniform and goes out with great talent, it doesn't take long before you see stratification. So anyway, that was A&B, and I wound up becoming president of A&B, which I enjoyed a great deal. And in those days, boys would date girls. So we had dates, and we used to have dances. And I would hire Georgie Graham and his orchestra. Very good. And they would play, and we would have dances, and we would have food laid out, hors d'oeuvres and things, and never any liquor. Never had liquor when I was in high school. I don't think any of us did. Knew nothing about drugs, I'm happy to say, and maybe some did, but I certainly didn't at all. Anyway, I was very happy in high school, going to school, having friends, no athletics, working in the store. That was it. Now, I was interested in theater, and I was an actor in plays. I was the shortest kid in high school. Shortest kid! And so I was in several plays in which, of course, I had to play the juvenile. And Eleanor Morantz, my classmate, and I was older than her by a month. She was frequently my mother. Or Edna Price, tall girl also, must have been about 5'6", was frequently my mother in these plays. Fun. So I was in plays, and then I became the editor of the yearbook. And I suppose I don't know how, I don't remember how or why, but I became the editor of the yearbook. Now, this is by no means to brag. This just shows my innocence and stupidity. I did very well in high school. I got good marks and all that. And so one day I said to my friend Yudi Rubin, whose father, Joe Rubin, was a dentist, I said, Yudi, where are you going to go to college? And he said, I'm going to go to Tufts. I said, really, where's that? He said, I remember, this is a conversation, verbatim. He says, Medford, don't you know the brown and blue? I said, the what? He says, that's the color of the school, the brown and blue, it's Tufts. Didn't you ever have Jumbo? I says, Jumbo, that's an elephant. Yes, 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 that elephant is a Tufts. I said, where is it? Now, anyway, I told my mother about it, and our busy day in the restaurant was Saturday. Sunday, we were closed. So all the stores were closed on Sunday. So one Sunday, and I guess October, early November, my mother drove me out to, maybe it was 18, maybe I was driving. Of course, I was over 16, I was driving too. We had one car, but we had a wonderful Chrysler that had push buttons for shifting, push buttons. So we drove out to Medford, and I looked around and I saw the campus. Oh, and it looked very, very nice. And there was a building, I think it was Packard Hall, that had, it said, admissions. So I went in and told them that, you know, I'm looking at the school, very, very nice. And they gave me an application to apply. Yeah. Now, this is in October, November. Everyone is taking the sort of new test at that time called the Scholastic Achievement Test, right? SAT, yeah, SATs. They're still called SATs, Scholastic Achievement. And of course, your entrance to college would be dependent upon the SATs. But anyway, I got home, and in early November, I filled out the application, and I went to my father figure, because my father had been dead since I was 12. Dr. Ben Fielding, who I loved. He was a big, lovable, rough guy. And this is typical of Ben Fielding. He was called a police surgeon because at that time, whenever an ambulance went out, a police surgeon went with him, and he had a Cadillac convertible. So the siren would go, and right behind would be Ben Fielding in his Cadillac convertible. And this is, he asked me to come up to the office and see his office, see what goes on in a doctor's office. Because then I had an idea I wanted to be a doctor. Come and look. So here's a woman. He says, okay, time for a shot. Pull your pants down and stick your fat ass out at me. And the woman chuckled and laughed, and he gave her a shot, and that was it. And I said, oh boy, this is an interesting guy. And that, he was lovable and loved. Great, great human being. So it was Ben Fielding who wrote my application that I was a reasonable human being, I suppose. Well, about 2 weeks after I applied, I got a letter from Tufts accepting me, the class of 51. And I asked around. Nobody in the school had been accepted by anyone. They were waiting for the SATs in like March. So I figured instead of saying, hold it, I'm going to take the SAT, I'm going to apply to some other schools like Harvard, Yale, Columbia, Penn. But anyway, I figured, look, I'm in college. I can devote all my time to working in the restaurant, doing the yearbook, which I did. Wound up going to Tufts. So did Judy Rubin, by the way. Maybe I'll be able to get back to some things I can think of in my high school years. But on the whole, they were good. After my father's passing, we had to make a life. And because we had to work, we adjusted. Each summer, my mother, who grew up in New York, she grew up in the same house, by the way, as either Louis B. Mayer or Samuel Goldwyn. I forgot which one. So she could have been the next Theda Bara if she tried hard enough. But anyway, Theda Bara, for you kids, was a Brooklyn-born movie actress years and years ago. Anyway, because she was a New Yorker, at that time, New Yorkers on their vacation would go to what was called the country. And the country was the Catskill Mountains. So each summer, I would drive my mother and the two younger kids to the Catskill Mountains, to Sullivan County, maybe the Flagler Hotel, maybe Brickman's Hotel. I can't recall the others, maybe Brown's Hotel. But anyway, then I would drive back the same day and go to work. And the following weekend, because my father's brother Ben, a bachelor, had moved to Worcester and was helping us in the restaurant, he would be there for 2 or 3 days, and I would go on a Sunday and come back on Wednesday. Wrong. I would go on a Wednesday and come back on Sunday, or with my mother and the kids. That's how it would work. And in the Catskills, the food was fabulous. I loved that food. The swimming was, I learned to swim a little bit there. I never played the sports, but my brother and I went horseback riding all the time, or many times anyway. And one time after a major gallop, we brought the horses in, they were sweaty, and they said, "You guys ain't never gonna be these horses anymore." That's it. So we were enjoined from horseback riding. But at any rate, I loved the entertainment there. I met a contemporary, a young kid named Eddie Fisher, who was at the Brickman, and came back a couple of times, and I spent time with him. Each time, because I said, I loved the way you sang, "You can't be true, dear, there's nothing more to say, I'm telling you, dear," and so forth. And he said, "See if you can go and find that on my new Columbia record." And he told me on the QT, he says, "I haven't made the record yet." I said, "Eddie, I think your voice is terrific. You will." I haven't had such prescience with the stock market, however, but I'm pretty good on vocalists. Anyway, I love the Catskill Mountains, and I love the comedians. And there in the Catskill Mountains, so I'm now talking in the 40s, I saw there were comedians who played what was called the Borscht Belt. Why? Because it's a Jewish area, and at every lunch, soup was available. You could have pea soup or matzo ball soup, but they always had borscht, called borscht. So it was called the Borscht Belt. And the comedians are wonderful. And I saw there, nobody else in the country ever heard of these guys, Red Skelton, and Milton Berle, and Jackie Mason, and name it, all the people who then, in the early years of TV, went on to become the big stars. And it was a great experience. And I loved early TV because I knew these guys, had seen them anyway. I remember the first TV set I had. When I was in college, it didn't take long before I was pledged to a Jewish fraternity, which is called AE Pi, Alpha Epsilon Pi, which started at NYU and then spread to colleges all over the country. And you go through the whole Greek alphabet, alpha, beta, gamma, delta, epsilon, and so forth. When you finish those, it makes the 26 letters, you start again. With seconds, that's deuteron. So it's alpha deuteron, beta deuteron, and so forth. Tufts was eta, ETA, deuteron, which shows how many of the AE Pi's there were throughout the country. Jewish fraternity, very high values. It was really, we were gentlemen. And a guy named Charlie Kellman, Jerry Kershaw, and one or two others and I used to write skits And the A.E. Pie skits were the hit of the college. We put them on, maybe once every month and a half or so in the fraternity house. And I was one of the authors. I was often on the boards also. We did skits, and everybody wanted to come to the A.E. Pie skits, they were called, because they were funny and they were topical. They were good. Charlie Kellman, by the way, who was not my roommate, but he was in the next room, but we were together all the time. He came from Forest Hills, and he went through Tufts College in 3 years. For the rest of us, 4 years, he went through in 3 years and applied to medical school. And at that time, and in the year I applied to, colleges where Jewish people could go to school had about a strict 6% maximum. Couldn't get into college. They already filled their 6%. So Charlie Kellman was not accepted by any American medical school and wound up going to Geneva Medical School. Now, he was a wonderful musician, clarinet, and he wrote songs. We wrote songs together. I wrote lyrics. I was Ira, he was George. He went there, and while there, he wound up with 2 songs on the French hit parade. And one of them was Le Petit Déjeuner, which means the little breakfast. And it describes a couple talking about, this is France, remember, talking about what they did last night before this little breakfast. So it made a big, big hit. Anyway, Charlie Kellman became an ophthalmologist. And up until Charlie Kellman, if a person had cataracts, they would have the cataract taken out of their eye, and then they would have to wear glasses, which I used to call the bottoms of Coca-Cola bottles. They were like that thick, and your eyes looked like little BBs inside, but that's ridiculous. They had no lens. Charlie Kellman himself, that one man, reversed the whole surgery of cataracts by inventing this. Make a tiny opening in the eye, put in a tiny needle, put in a chemical called phacoemulsification, and then with a suction, suck out the lens. The chemical softened the lens, sucked it out, and the lens is gone, and then he put into the eye a little plastic lens designed by pre-testing specifically for your eye. And so everybody who has a cataract now, us old guys say, I can of course see nice and clearly, and I can see better now than I ever did when I was a kid and had to wear nearsighted glasses. Anyway, that's Charlie Kellman. Poor guy died last year, 2 years ago, cancer of the lung. All right, now in college, I told you about the fraternity. Each year, Tufts had a big thing where you voted for a student to be the mayor of Tufts College, the mayoralty race. And so my fraternity put me up as a candidate for mayor. And we decided on the character of Kickapoo Stu. At that time, Little Abner was a very major comic strip, and one of the characters out in the Ozarks was no, it wasn't a character. Moonshine was called Kickapoo Joy Juice. That's how they got the name, Kickapoo Joy Juice. So I was Kickapoo Stu, and one of my